Hey Adam, how's it going? Thanks for sending in your work here. Let's start off by just taking a look and then we'll get into the notes.
I'm not your man.
I'm what you want here, I'm what you need here. Just you and me, my love in paradise. Now till the end of time. From here on out, you're mine.
Awesome. So I think in general, all the beats are pretty clear. There's one or two things I think where I think the idea of the beat is good, but maybe there's some fixing that can happen, some changes to make things clear, and maybe it's a bit of timing, a bit of changes. We'll get into it as we go on. Cameras wise is probably where more of the notes are going to come from in this review. I think locking that stuff down early and making sure that you're getting kind of the most out of what you've got is going to help. So I'll probably go through the camera notes first. Let me close my work zoom so we don't get notifications popping up. Cool. So the first camera note I had, and I've got the mic scene open, so I'm going to give it a go as well, is, well, the general idea of the camera notes is I think some of these camera moves are a bit too mad. I do think you can probably do this one. I think this one can work. This, I mean, right now, obviously, the camera's leading the character, but I imagine there'll be some breakdowns in here, so the character will, in fact, lead the characters. Camera will... the characters will lead the camera. Sorry, I said it the wrong way around. I think that'll help. I think this camera move up to her here, it would be better as a cut. And I think this move would be better as a cut as well. And I think there's probably some framing stuff we can do on this one. This could be a push-in, but I think you need to think of it a little bit more A to B. So I'm going to jump in Maya and kind of explain what I mean with that. So I'm just going to have a go at the cameras with the animation you've currently got. Like there might be some animation changes that would also need to go along with that. I don't have the textures for these characters because I don't own them, but we can get the point across with just this. So the first camera note I was going to make, I'm just going to set a key on 1 and 0, and then on 1 I'm going to play around with composition a little bit. I think what could work for this shot is lowering it a bit, something like this, maybe raising it slightly. Obviously we want to keep that mirror in the foreground. I just wanted to understand the geography a little bit better. So maybe something like this, and maybe for staging purposes, you could get him a little bit further back and over or something just so that the chair is super visible, so that within the first few frames of the shot you're just aware of kind of what's happening, what the situation is. With this, you don't really see the chair, and as such, it's kind of the clarity is lost to some extent. The other thing that you could play around with is the focal length. I'm going to set another key on both of these things, and we'll set this to having the same focal length. Oh, license expired. Amazing. It should be fine. There you go. I have paid for AdamBot. I just haven't opened my local Maya in a while. Cool. So let's play around with focal length. Oh, it's this camera, isn't it? Of course. So let's maybe instead try a narrower focal length, which is going to push the characters close together. And, you know, it's basically zooming in. So let's try a, maybe like a 65. This is obviously going to crunch us in way too much, but if I just translate back, and then I'll adjust I'm just going to match up kind of the framing that we had before, but with a longer lens, and see how that's feeling. These are things that we can play around with. I personally prefer somewhat longer lenses on CG characters. I think they help to, whoops, let's get this kind of wherever you wanted it. I think longer lenses on CG characters really help to flatten them out and make them feel a bit more graphic. And they get a bit distorted when you get into wider lenses, which is maybe something we can talk about pushing at the ending of this shot when we get to that, as I think that could work quite well. I'm going to undo this and set keys on this as well, just so we can compare the composition. So it was here on this one, and then I'll paste the word space on this so that we have that. So we can play around with, it depends how much depth you want to give to it. So like now that we have these two, I actually quite like the wider lens here, but you can see kind of what I'm talking about with the face being flattened. If you look into let's pull up the Chrome browser here. Focal length, portrait. If you look into focal lengths, you'll see, you know, the longer the lens, the higher the number. It's pretty low resolution for some reason. Yeah, the longer the lens, the higher the number, the more flattering it might be because you're kind of flattening out things. If you go too far, it will look a bit crazy. And then the wider, the more distorted, because you probably might already know this, but focal lengths, the lower the focal length, it's basically zooming out in the camera, but it also makes the distances between things seem bigger, whereas as a higher focal length, make the distances between things seem closer. So when I'm looking at with this shot, I wanted to experiment a little bit with playing with that focal length. So there's some potential here. I do think I prefer the wider for this establishing though, since we want to establish that environment and see a bit more of that environment. So it was worth experimenting with, but I think for now, let's just say we keep it. I should probably make a selection set or something for these different controls I'm using to play with composition. Yeah, for now, let's keep it with this. This was your initial. I pushed it up and down a little bit to get this, which I think has a lot more clarity. So let's go for that. So you get this. Now, obviously, now I've changed it. This action is gonna be messed up a bit, and we're gonna be missing some of her action, which is probably not what you want. Try to think of maybe you could have a little bit of camera movement to go along with it. So as she, I'll hold that back until maybe add a tiny bit of a ease out on it. Using some hotkeys here. I'm not technically showing you how to do this. It's more about experimenting with the ideas of it. It's way too harsh right now, so let's. Yeah, maybe this is too much. So we can find like a mid ground where I can scale this towards. Maybe something like this is fine. Like, you don't need to see it for all the frames. It depends how much of a hold and a clarity you wanted on that silhouette of this. That there's a bit of playing around with that. Maybe you could cheat her lower in frame to help with this. The main point of lowering that camera, raising it and tilting it down, was to see the chair. To which I think you could probably have a little bit more side on, so that you can see that chair as well. That's another note. Just want to see that chair a little bit. So you can experiment with it. It's just about clarity. I won't spend forever making it work necessarily here. And now I've got super spliny keys all over the place. Yeah, so just with a few small tweaks, I've got something like this, which I think is a bit clearer. There's a few points now where they sort of overlap in posing, which maybe could be fiddled with. And I am feeling like there's a lot of negative space on this right side. So maybe translation-wise, we can grab this and go over. Oops, let's maybe go in world. Maybe the character can move as well, and that way we'll give them a bit less room. So like this kind of layout pass is really good just to really experiment and get pushed to get as much clarity as possible. Maybe something like this where they're a bit wider would allow for let's see. Oh, I don't know if me doing something has messed up the ending here. Something's happened with that ending. I'm really not sure why. Oh, there was no keys on this. Okay. Okay, let's just undo that quickly. I want to make it work just so you can see kind of where all the ideas are coming from. So let's just make sure that maybe during this camera move, for now, I'll cheat this controller. That's fine. We'll just cheat just so that I can get the idea across. Sorry, we'll get back to notes in a minute. I'm fiddling around in your scene for a bit too long, but hopefully this is at least part of the part of the animation process. Experimentation, you know how it is. So let's quickly try one more time. This, and this. I'll make my geo selectable. This, and this. Give them a bit more clearance. Use up a bit more of the whole frame. Bosh. Key. The tiara is not in the right place now, but... And is she moving? I'm not sure. Whoa, what the hell? Okay, this to this. Same thing. So now we get that break in silhouette between the two of them, which is what we were after, right? So to me, this has a little bit clearer staging. I kind of want to chuck some... Because there's no materials on the walls, you're getting that weird black type stuff. So I'm just going to chuck on like some random lights just to make it easy to see what's going on. But again, this is just for staging purposes. You don't need to light everything yet. This is just so we can see what's going on. Cool. So this first camera move, we'll keep going with cameras for a second and then I'll get into the beats, notes and things. I think for this camera move, whilst you're coming around, you can get a little bit more rotation Y so that there's a equidistant between the two of them a little bit more. Probably check that in the graph and make sure that's a clean spline between the two poses, which is mostly looking like it is. Cool. And it looks to me... Is there some kind of... No, it's a clean spline, but something feels like it's hitting... Maybe it's because the rotation stops. Yeah, I think it's this. I think your rotation needs to continue in a similar amount to the translation so that it doesn't feel locked. Still feels a bit locked to me. Feels a bit like 1, 2, 1, 2 right now. So there's something in there, but a bit of cleanup and you'll get there, I think. Cool. So the next one, camera-wise, is this move here. I think you might literally just be better off cutting. You can cut like on this action, so like here or something. I'll just take this key, more like, and bosh. This one can stay. Obviously, we're just like teleporting to another pose right now, so it feels a bit weird. So you want to lead that action with that pose change before you cut. So then when we get to this camera angle, we're still in a 30. Again, we could experiment with the camera, and because you're cutting, you can change that focal length and try and get something that feels a bit more correct for what you're going for per shot on a shot by shot basis. So maybe here we're starting to get into crazy mode. We could play around with getting it closer to her, maybe even getting some slight Dutch angles, getting much closer to her and experimenting with that kind of depth. So let's go something like that, but then let's just drop this to a 20. And get real close to her in here. So we can start playing with that distortion factor that we sort of mentioned at the start. So if I key this and go up a frame, and we keyed the frame before. So we're going from like this to this, where we get a little bit more of that pushed, fun, dynamic kind of thing going on. And I think that's going to kind of help from this a bit more flat, and we're getting a bit more dynamic, and that slight Dutch angle as well is going to help with that. And because we're cutting, we can kind of get to those kind of crazy angles. And then I think on her turn here is when you'd probably cut back round to your next angle, which is around here somewhere. But I think this angle isn't working amazingly for me, so I'm going to play around with that. Again, maybe there's some focal length stuff we can do. You're kind of just stuck in the 30 for the whole shot, so I think There's some things. I think the fact that he's closer to camera, I think keeping them... Well, because he's close to camera, maybe we can lean into that then, and we can use him as kind of the foreground and her as the background here, right? So let's experiment with that. I'm just going to zero this out for now and try and find something that works a bit better. Yeah, live experimentation, as I say, we're fiddling. So let's try again, push closer and keep it in that wider range. I think maybe on this cut. Oh, let's just do it on a frame for now. Maybe we can cheat and have him more in line with her. So let's just try this experiment a bit. We get that cut. Obviously that's not working right now. And let's make sure that this is happening over that same cut timing. And let's see how... Okay, that's fucking mental, isn't it? There's something in here that might take me a bit too long to figure out. And obviously, like, when you're cutting on an action, it's going to be a lot cleaner and easier to follow. Maybe this isn't right. Maybe we should be going to a more flat on angle. That's perfectly reasonable. So let's just go to what you had quickly. What you had is here. Okay, let's try what you had, but then let's experiment with what you had again. So maybe flat on angle is what we want. So let's try that. I think if you do go for that flat on, maybe we do want to involve a bit of that Dutch because everything's a bit out of whack, you know. So this works for this beat, but then for this beat where she comes in, maybe again we could cut, or maybe we could push in. So there's two options, right? So let's try a cut. I want to cut. I want to cut on the action, but obviously the action's not there right now, so we're just kind of cutting and hoping that the timing works. But then when you get your animation in there, maybe there's a bit of leniency. So I just cut to what you had. Maybe we go. I'm just going to steal this positioning again, just because that's what you planned for initially. It's going to feel a bit weird because I'm cheating space, but you could play with this, or you could have him. You could keep him further back, but then have her further back on this action. I'm just going to use the master controller to do that because I'm lazy. Whoops! I want her on this frame. Bosh, bosh. Yeah, maybe somewhere in here. That's what you were going for. Hopefully it was. Yeah, that's close enough that we can play with the cameras and get something working. So let's try a cut where we really get in. And then, yeah, then you've got a quite complex spline to get into that push in, which you're going for. Oh, whoops. So maybe when we push in, we could experiment again with that widening of the lens. Go to like a 20. Push in some more. And then that final framing, it's all a bit fucked right now because I've messed with everything. Anyway, I'll stop fiddling with cameras and give you the more anim notes in a second, but I just wanted to give you an idea of kind of where you might be able to push some things, add a little ease on that as well, because it's hitting a bit harsh right now. Something weird is happening in the splines in there. Make sure that's all auto. Maybe I'll give it a slight. So it's got like a moving hold at the end, which is something I thought was missing before. So this is a bit wacky right now, but let's just play it through and see how it feels. Maybe this is a push-in situation. I think it could be. That's way too sharp. Just give it some ease. Maybe it's a much tighter ease. Could be something like this. So yeah, there's a bit of experimentation still to be had before you kind of lock in, I think. So we spent 20 minutes playing around. I would hope that you would spend a bit more time to figure out some stuff. But trying to vary those focal lengths and trying to make sure the composition is reading throughout. You might end up with something which helps sell kind of the story a little bit better and help kind of it all flow just via the cameras before we even talk about animation, right? So yeah, we'll maybe I can play blastly this and send it to you as an example. I'm going to turn on, I like having these guys on sometimes, which are the tech safe and the camera safe things, which is usually in a shot, like when I've worked in film and TVs at some places, they're big on these, which are these little boxes. They're basically like any action that happens shouldn't be outside of this if you want it to read or whatever, right? That's like the rule of thumb. So like before, maybe you had a few things which were happening outside of it. And now naturally I've put it all kind of inside of this box. And that's something to pay attention to. So I like to animate with these on a lot of the time just to make sure that things are kind of framed correctly. That's something to think about. Cool. So that's that's the cameras. We've blabbed about the cameras for way too long. Let's go back to the shot and let's talk about more animation and pose notes that I had and some idea notes. So let's go through one by one what I wrote down. We already talked about the cameras, so I'll skip that stuff. First one, I think her starting off in this kind of, it looks like she's pissed off to me. Her starting off in that pose, I don't think is what you want. I think you already want her to be like, I'm the king of the world. I'm great. I'm amazing. Sassy. I really like anything. Jim Kim, who's the character designer for this film, and Glenn Keane did a bunch of the stuff as well. This middle pose, that kind of like, sassy, look at me. And the guys in the background kind of sweating. That contrast, having that contrast from the start of her being super confident and not pissed off, but like, I'm deliriously excited and happy about the situation I'm in, and this man loves me. It's that kind of trope, right? I don't think her being pissed off at the start doesn't help with that acting. So her kind of sitting there like, and then put the crown on, very sassy, very that kind of feminine, femme fatale kind of thing, which I think a lot of these Mother Gothel poses kind of have in it. That's something to kind of look at. Here I said separate the forms. Basically what I meant by that was, I think just being a bit more side on will help the clarity of it, and like his head readability wouldn't be inside that shoulder as much. So we already talked about having him a bit more side on in this shot anyway when we were doing the cameras part, so that would cover most of that. That was most of that note. Here, this was a bigger one, which I feel like their beats are overlapping quite a lot. So she puts the crown down right as he starts to sing, only a few frames later, and then she drops her arms, you know. So keeping those beats separate a bit more. If you could lead with the crown and the pose, and then he starts speaking and maybe she eye darts over. That way you have her action, then his action, the audience are looking at her, he starts to act, you look at him. Instead of them overlapping each other, you kind of break up those two beats and it will keep the clarity a lot better. So that's kind of the point I was making there. I mean, this is for a way later stage, but when he starts singing, he's kind of in this contemplative, and then when he starts singing, you open up the face, you open up the eye mask. That was maybe too early to give this kind of note, but it popped out to me. here's the camera thing I talked about. It's just panning over to make sure that you have kind of a similar amount of negative space on each side of the characters as you're doing this big camera move. A general note for the whole shot that I had when I was looking, and I don't know if it's the rigs or he's closer to camera in a lot of places, but his head just looks way bigger to me than hers. Like this, I mean, me doing this to the camera isn't very useful, but his head is, you know, like 20-30% bigger in like all shots compared to hers. Even when she's like close to camera at times, I feel like his head is massive compared to hers. So maybe there's a bit of scaling or something like here, especially I noticed it as well, where her head is, you know, I wish I could move that little circle over, but his head is so much bigger, like the taper there, even though they're kind of in line in space. So as such, maybe his head needs to be scaled down to match more. Maybe that's just something in the rigs themselves, but we want them to feel like they're in the same world. They'd have pretty much the same size head, you know, they're the same proportions-ish, like head scale. So that's something to look out for. The next big bit, I like all of this stuff a lot. I love the idea of this spin, but the spin isn't working for me right now. And I think the reason the spin isn't working for me is all about head clarity. And I think what would make it easier for you is if you think about the spin of the chair as more of a his body is generally moving and settling, but then the spin is happening on top of it. So the pivot is kind of much more around the head rather than like the base of the chair. The pivot on the base of the chair means that the head moves a lot, whereas the pivot being closer to the head moves less, right? The closer to the head the pivot is, the more the things further away from the head moves, but the head stays more still and goes in one clean thing. I think you want to keep that head clarity. I mixed the letters wrong. You want to keep that head clarity as you're doing that spin, so that you get like a real read on him and whoa, and he gets back to that point. And I think right now you're losing a lot of it with that, having that head like so it's fine having that head move here over. It's fine because you get that cool composition. However, maybe that composition could be pushed. Since you could do it as a really snappy moment, and God, let's open Mara again and think about it. When you get to the here, there's a possibility of getting like a crazy. Whoops. Let's experiment a little bit with. Maybe it's the other way. Just thinking of ways that you can get like a real pushed composition. Maybe this is too much. Maybe it's this kind of getting it closer to camera and filling up the screen more, but through mechanics and then moving versus through the camera changing too much, you know. Maybe that's how you achieve that fun composition. And then I think there's probably some stuff where his shoulders could be more in alignment to that plane, and his head could maybe be more side on, so you get a read on his head. There's some stuff there. I don't know. It's difficult to figure out. I don't know what your setup is with this chair, but his chest and everything. So I won't play with it too much, but something where you get a little bit more readability. I've not touched this rig yet. Rigs look great, by the way. Ramon's smashed these rigs out. They look fucking sick. I don't think you want to read on his eyes, but you just want to feel. Right now, I feel like the shoulders maybe are too pinched, but that's kind of obviously that's you've got this whole seeing thing. Maybe that will help it though if you cheat that. So you get that clearer plane. Anyway, when you get to that pose and you start pushing it more, you can play with that, and we can talk about it more when we get into that kind of side of things. Cool. So I talked about the pivot of the chair. That's one of the main beats that isn't working for me right now, and it's because we're pivoting from the bottom of the chair, and then the way it stops as well. If it's just one piece going over and settling, like if you think about it in two phases, which is like positionally what it's doing, and then rotation on top of that, whoa, and then settles, and he kind of settles, whoa, and when he settles, you can get like some real like breathing, oh, and she's still singing. She's still singing. Who's talking to me? And then she turns away. Oh, so this is a note for the cut, right? Yep. Yeah, and then the next beat, which there's these two beats which I think we can talk about a little bit with the man. I think she's great. I think the singing stuff is all clear and nice, and I like a lot of the acting. There's a little bit in here I want to talk about as well, but we'll get to that. So here when he does this shuffling, again, I think head clarity is super important. I think instead of going a real big lean and a shuffle, you just keep it clearer and just like you keep it upright more, like he's tied to this thing. You just bounce it more like in the translate. You can get a little bit of flexibility in it, you know, but the head clarity isn't, whoa, it's way off screen and we're bouncing. It's just like she's touching him. She backs away. Okay. Like this kind of thing where we're really staying within that main tied up pose. We're not breaking away too much. And by that, we keep that face readability to camera and that clarity in that head. It's not moving around too much. So we lose kind of the facial expression, which is, you know, the clarity of his acting. And then, you know, when she comes back and touches him, I mean, maybe you could do like a type thing. But this smile right now is giving me way more sincere. This is like, you caught me, huh? Whereas I think it's more like fear, like, like I don't even know if I would smile. I might keep it in full fear mode. This crazy bitch. You know, just to keep that contrast between her joyous singing and flowy and his like just pure panic. I think the contrast between the two is where the comedy comes from. So having him have a jokey beat where he's like, it's fine, I wasn't trying to escape. Like, it just overcomplicates things. I think you really would just want to stick to that clear dynamic. She's crazy, psycho, flowy, fine. He's stiff. What's happening? Sharp, you know, jittery, like a bit more. And I think that's really going to help your acting throughout the whole thing. So that's something to definitely think about. This one, I think the head angle and the amount of lean again is a bit dodgy. I think instead it's like she's trying to talk to me. This kind of thing. I think I've drawn the head like perfectly straight here, and instead I would kind of follow that neckline a little bit more. So maybe like 30% of that tilt. So the head angle would actually be more like that. That's just my failure to draw heads at an angle. Apparently I can only draw them straight. But yeah, I think right now this isn't reading to me, whereas this like don't fucking leave me alone type thing is way clearer. So that would be the note there. Yeah, right. I took out the camera. That's a camera note there where I just talked it's hitting too hard right now. So softening that ending and having that moving hold on the pushing, which we did in the camera pass that I was playing around with. And then I think at the end, you could kind of be singing through gritted teeth. What does she say?
From here on out, you're mine.
From here on out, you're mine. From here on out, you're mine. And you can't get away. And I'm talking through my teeth and I'm full psycho. And I love you. You know, that's the vibe I think you should be going for instead of like, I think you're getting that fun psycho energy coming out by doing that gritted teeth stuff. And I think that would be what I'd go for. Let me go to that drawing that I had. The other thing is just keep an eye on, it's early, but brow structure. Especially with these rigs, they're a bit more anatomical. So you're going to get kind of these 3 breaks in the brow. That's kind of how it always goes. Usually this third one's way smaller usually. That middle line is usually by far the longest. And then you get these 2 small ones, one to show the furrow, one that's just like an anatomical kind of break. Sometimes you can have 2 lines where you just have the break and this way, or you have this and then a slight one. But it's always nice to get like a hint of 1, 2, 3, I think personally. 1, 2, 3. You know, it's these 2 breaks, right? There's 2 breaks, but there's 3 lines. So it depends which way you look at it. Right now, you're kind of missing that in your pose, and it's getting a bit rounded, which takes away from tension, right? Like tension is going to come from those straights instead of those rounds when you get to that pose. Awesome, man. So I just ranted for ages. There's a few ideas, things. There's a lot of camera stuff, but that's kind of the stage you're at, where it's a lot of fiddling, making sure the idea is clear, and then you get into execution more and more. And as we keep going through this project, the focus will switch from kind of these bigger, broader, more destructive notes, and hopefully start to get into more, mechanical notes and actual technique notes versus, all of these big, broad ones. Cool, man. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you have any questions. Hopefully that stuff was useful for you. And yeah, see you next time. Thank you. See you later, mate. Bye-bye.